Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be about how to set and reinforce personal boundaries. Stay tuned. Today's video was a request from one of my subscribers. Thanks for requesting this video. It's a really good subject and a really important topic to learn about. So in this video, we're going to be talking about boundaries, and I want to cover a couple different aspects of boundaries because boundaries can be a really complex topic. There have been entire books written about this subject. In this video, my goal is to describe what boundaries are, give some examples of what they might look like, and teach you how to reinforce boundaries if people aren't willing to listen to them. So jumping right into the content, what are boundaries? Well, a boundary is the space between you and another person. It can be looked at like where you begin and another person ends. Boundaries, they exist on a continuum. You can have really loose boundaries or really rigid boundaries. Really where we kind of want to aim is somewhere in the middle of that. We want to aim for something we call healthy boundaries. And healthy boundaries are so important for our mental health and our self-care. And really the purpose that boundaries serve is really a form of protection. They also help provide us with our own identity, meaning that they stop us from becoming enmeshed with another person. Boundaries are important for avoiding things like burnout and making sure that our relationships are healthy and they aren't drifting towards that toxic end. How do we set boundaries with other people? Well, the first thing we really need to learn is what our limits are. Where do we stand physically, emotionally, even spiritually with other people in our life? And how we learn that is really diving into what our identity is, trying to figure out in what situations are we comfortable and in what situations are we uncomfortable, and being really honest with ourselves about that. And this can change person to person and definitely based on the relationship that you have with each person in your life. But we want to make sure that we know that stuff so we are able to set and reinforce our limits. One thing that can be really helpful with this is really tuning into our feelings. In what situations are we comfortable and in what situations are we uncomfortable with the different people in our lives? I really enjoy talking with you on the phone, but I don't appreciate phone calls at 2 a.m. The next thing that we want to do when we set boundaries is we want to be direct. We want to be something that we call assertive. And assertive is really a fancy way of meaning that what we are saying is exactly what we're meaning. Being assertive is not the same thing as being aggressive. We do not need to be aggressive when we set boundaries. We want to be assertive. We want to be respectful when we set boundaries with other people. Because often when we set boundaries, the goal isn't to end the relationship with someone. It is just basically saying, this is what I'm going to tolerate and this isn't what I'm going to tolerate. And we want to be really direct about that, but we don't need to be disrespectful about it. And the best way to set a direct boundary is by having a conversation that has healthy communication with the other person. This can involve validating how the person feels. It can sound like, hey, I really do enjoy spending time with you. However, I also need time by myself. And then discussing what exactly is that going to look like. One error that people run into when they set boundaries, I think, is they also tend to over-explain why they're setting the boundary. And this part is not necessary. I know that I find myself doing that, and it's usually because, well, historically I have struggled myself to set boundaries with other people. This is something that I continually work on myself. But the way that I would set boundaries is to give a big follow-up explanation on exactly why I'm setting a boundary. So like if I was asked to stay late at work, I would be like, no, I can't stay late at work. I have to do A, B, and Z. I have to take my son to a baseball game. That part really is not necessary. I am unable to stay late today is completely okay to just say that. And I think a lot of this over-explaining comes to ease the guilt for people that don't feel comfortable setting boundaries. And by continually over-explaining, it isn't going to make us any more comfortable with setting boundaries either. So that goes into my next tip, which is give yourself permission to set boundaries. Another reason we might struggle with setting boundaries is because we fear the other person's response. Understand that we can't control how other people react to us, and this is across all circumstances and relationships with other people. If we are living our life in a way where we are constantly trying to protect the other person, that is only going to end up harming us. And this is because then we're living our lives to please other people, or we're being people pleasers. And the issue with people pleasing and living our lives to serve others is that we're not necessarily doing it because we're trying to be good people. We're doing it out of fear. We're doing it out of fear of rejection, out of people not liking us, out of people's negative reactions. We can't control any of that. People pleasing leads to feeling taken advantage of. It leads to feeling resentful towards other people and just overall poor mental health. So give yourself permission to set good boundaries. Don't worry about what the response of the other person is going to be. Do this because you know that you need to do it to be healthy. Know that healthy relationships usually have healthy boundaries. The next tip is to practice self-awareness. Are the boundaries that you're setting, are they being respected? An area where people can sometimes get stuck with setting boundaries is the reinforcement. And the truth is that sometimes setting a boundary one time is not enough. So yeah, sometimes that does mean that we have to reinforce the same boundary with the same person. And I have a formula for this that I want to share with you that might be helpful. The first thing is to remind the person of your boundary, especially if it's been a while since you've had that conversation or set that boundary with that person. Remind them, and that can just look like, hey, remember we talked about this, and when you do this, I don't feel good, I don't feel respected. When you do this, this bothers me. And what we're hoping happens at that point is the person will be like, oh yeah, I forgot, I apologize, it won't happen again. But sometimes that doesn't happen, especially with toxic people or people that in general struggle with boundaries, and that can be for a lot of reasons. I could make a whole video about that one. And at that point in time, after we've reminded and reinforced our boundary to someone and they're still not respecting it, you're still getting calls at 2 a.m., someone at work is still expecting you to do their work too, the person is still bringing up a topic that you two agreed to not talk about, then we might need to be like, hey, I don't feel like you're respecting my boundary, and we've had this conversation more than once at this point and it's continuing to happen. There are going to be consequences for that. Consequence might be that you and I are unable to remain friends. This friendship can't continue because you're not willing to respect my boundaries. I don't know if it's healthy for me to spend time together alone with you anymore. If we're going to remain friends, this is a conversation that we can't talk about. Quick note on that. There are lots of people in my life that I'm close with that I know that I can't have certain conversations with, or I can't tell them certain things about my life. And that's okay. You're allowed to keep things to yourself. Boundaries aren't just, don't do this to me. It can also be like, I can't talk about this with you, or I can't disclose this information to you. As a person, you are completely and totally entitled to a private life. That means there are things that you do not have to share with your mother, you don't have to share with your best friend. There are things that you can keep totally to yourself. And this can be really important in maintaining relationships with certain people. We can talk about A, B, and C, but D over here is not good for our relationship to talk about D. That's okay to do. Some tips if you're having some issues setting boundaries. My first tip is to consider your past. Were boundaries present in your family? What did that look like? How to set boundaries is something that we tend to learn from our caregivers. And if we were in a family where there weren't good and clear boundaries, like in a relationship between our parents, for example, it can be hard to set later on in life because you weren't modeled healthy boundaries. Were you the caretaker in your family? Were other people in your family emotionally dependent on you? If you were constantly taking care of other people and ignoring your own needs, that might be the norm for you. That might be why you're struggling to set boundaries in your life right now. What are the relationships like in your life currently? So looking at the present. In other words, are your relationships toxic? As I said earlier, healthy relationships should naturally come with healthy boundaries, and this is reciprocal. Is there a healthy give and take, or not so much? What does your environment look like? At work, for example. If you're expected to work 8 hours a day, but everyone at work is working 10 to 11 hours a day, are you feeling obligated to also work 10 to 11 hours a day because they are? This is why tuning into your feelings and your needs is so critical when it comes to setting boundaries. We don't need to play follow the leader when it comes to our emotional health. My next tip is to make self-care a priority. This means putting yourself first. Allowing ourselves time to get into a good place emotionally can really help when it comes to setting boundaries, because then we're really learning about our self-worth and practicing self-compassion. And setting boundaries is part of self-compassion. So take some time, journal about where you're at, about how you're feeling, move forward with a clear head. My third tip is to seek support. If you're really struggling to set boundaries with other people, we can't let go of the people pleasing, or we're being too rigid with our boundaries, we're being really aggressive, seek the help of a therapist. The therapist can help you even role play situations in which you might have to set boundaries. So you're practicing and As you practice it, you'll become more and more competent and confident in your ability to set them in your real life. My last tip is to start small. If setting big, monumental boundaries is difficult for you, start with smaller boundaries. Start with something that doesn't seem so challenging for you, and then challenge yourself by building upon that. And remember that if you're not perfect with it, that's okay. Boundaries can take a lot of courage and practice and support. It's a skill, and one that is going to take a while to master. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you found it helpful. If you liked it, please make sure you give it a thumbs up. If you haven't yet, make sure you hit the subscribe button and subscribe to my channel. I release 2 new mental health videos every single week, and I would love it if you joined our community. Thanks, and have a wonderful day.